Oh, Pokemon Platinum, you beautiful creature. We meet once again. Gamers and gamettes, we're back, and today we have probably the most overhyped of the commonly considered top 5 best Pokemon games. Here, we're gonna dive into the third improved version that actually managed to make the Sinnoh experience not just tolerable, but thrilling as well, with the goal, of course, just to see how much better Platinum is. Because I'll be real, despite being pretty solid, the question of, is it as gas as people believe it to be, really needs to be asked. As coming in for another critiquing session, I'm seriously having my doubts even when I line up all my talking points. So the best part is going to be when I get to see if past me was a fraud or not. So outside of meandering or random bloat to keep the timestamps on screen long enough for you to get the idea, it's time to just surf into the game at a respectable speed. So, starting us off, we have the general bettering of the Sinnoh experience outside of battle. Because while at first glance the region is actually pretty damn solid, it's got a plethora of small annoyances picking away at the fun. For our prior good, we had a pretty large region with deceptively robust routes, with completely optional routes, areas, and reasons to come back later, on top of plenty of post-game content to explore. The blueprints were in fact handled very well. The fill between was not as much, mainly those damn snow slowdowns and mud-related time wastes, alongside fog. But the most fatal issue was, of course, the backtracking problems, 12 of which were mandatory to beat the game in the first place, mainly due to how story beat locations, unfortunately, did not meld itself well to the region's adventurous layouts. So now you know what was wrong to say. So now it's time to correct the issues, but not really. Thanks, Game Freak, very cool. So first we fixed backtracking, but actually make it worse instead. So instead of 12, kind of 13 to 15-ish backtracking trips with 3 tagged on for the post game, what if we killed the backtracking trip for the 5th, now 3rd gym, then tacked on another HM related fetching to replace that backtracking trip, and yet another trip post story climax just for no reason whatsoever. So it goes without saying that we're still drowning in the fly HM's necessity, as they quite literally made the backtracking worse by adding 1 extra spot. Yeah, bravo, Game Freak, that sucks. Although the big selling point is the new areas, which, what do we even have? I mean, there's this cool new world that is basically just glorified hallways packed down with walking, cool sights, and no sense at all, which is pretty gnarly. But sadly, nothing outside of a spectacle. And of course, it only gets better, as in certain areas it will lag. New area reworks exist, notably Stark Mountain exterior, resort area, a few gyms, and some more for bettering, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't do much. While this end of backtracking and a lack of meaningful region reforging may come off as not good, it's just a drop in a mostly filled bucket. Again, Sinnoh pretty much has its fundies down, just outside of that progression loop, despite being a bit better with HMs and linearization. In terms of making the story more seamless, certain gameplay sections have been altered a wee bit to fix mainly one generally bad gameplay decision. Yes, their pathetic excuse of non-linearity with sitting there whimpering and finally put down. So now when you pull up in Veilstone City, you're not just able to ignore the gym and wander over to Pastoria to do those 2 gyms in any order you want, just to immediately go do the other one with a lack of content in between, defeating said purpose of there even being a split at all. Now we have that weird jumbled mess of the early and late games, alongside this new linearized mid-game, no longer wasting your time, feeding Fantina's gym to you immediately when you first cross through Hearthome City, before following the road to be blessed with a forced Maylene fight and the grunt nonsense, followed by Wake's gym, which is now locked off until the story bits in Veilstone are done. Finally, afterwards becoming Diamond and Pearl again, where after Celestic Town, you just go to Canalave without a detour. This is better. Everything else outside of that completely purposeless detour rounds out the game the same as the last. Better, but still a mess-ish in the playthrough sense. Although in demessing a former situation, snagging the HMs required to eventually play the game have been made better, yet annoying for the knowledge gaps of Diamond and Pearl players. Lazily speaking, Cut, Rock Smash, Surf, Waterfall, Fly, and Rock Climb are completely unchanged, only really showing trouble with Rock Climb still being missable technically despite being needed, while luckily Defog and Strength have been moved into better positions. Defog getting the boot from the Safari Zone gotten earlier at the Solaceon Ruins, now costing nothing, from one optional area to another, this time not being tied to a feature. Strength on the other hand, leaving the Lost Tower, would be great if you weren't stuck getting it much later in the game. You didn't really need Strength as an attack anyways. But this new position on Iron Island is a deceptively big deal, courteous of an egg needed for unlocking the post game. But oh wait, what is that on the screen? Oh, it doesn't matter. And the game makes missing it impossible by getting your progress physically telling you where to go, instead where you'd previously just be met with a boulder and questions. Simply put, HMs are better this time around. No way. Act surprised. Of course, acting like a double-edged sword, because as always, HMs have their iron grip across the navigation experience, and it eats your cake too, which kind of sucks as fog is thrown onto another area, blocking you out of its rewards. It's small, but technically annoying, and different enough to be mentioned because your DP knowledge might bait you up there. Which is where we get to ditch the Sinnoh talk. Yep, we gotta slide on to the very little gameplay additions this third improved version has to better the Gen 4 experience. Fortunately, but also unfortunately, yet not that big of a deal for the lack of, we have gameplay made mechanically better, both in and out of battle, to be a better system that Platinum, alongside Heart Gold and Soul Silver, would be built upon. So first, the mons related jump. As get this, we have new forms for pre-existing mons. Yeah, the likes of Rotom, Giratina, and Shaman all got something new, sadly with gimmicks attached. The game's mascot with Giratina has its form changed, either from being somewhere with no content, or for an item that area holds onto for post-game content. The traits here are new meaningful stat changes, something Dialga would sadly never get, an ability change, and the forfeiting of the Mons held item for mid, which is new mechanically speaking for form changing. Shaman needs a key item to change its form until nighttime hits or it gets boxed. Bonuses applied this time include new stats, ability, the extra flying typing, and an altered level up learn set. Rotom gets a little bit wacky with it, as its forms are hidden behind a room, sadly tied to an event. Here you can stick a Rotom in any of the 5 appliances, capped to 1 of each form. Here, each form gets a unique attack and a weird stat line, being an absolutely massive meaningful stat change. Oh yeah, and Rotom also has this weird negative side where you actually just cannot use it in the Battle Frontier for its other forms for some reason. You've got to use the default. While these are good inclusions, they have the catch not being able to leave the game. Yeah, the fear of going to Diamond and Pearl was real. But as I've stated previously with Heart Gold Soul Silver, we have that dreadful downside of that whole vision of a definitive game not really existing because both games either have the Giratina or the Rotom forms as event only. Here with Rotom and theirs with Giratina. All because those forms can't leave the damn game. Without cheating, you can't get both. Moving on, we have the minor improvements. Out of battle benefits like the surf speed being tolerable, ruining my perfectly functional blue molasses ocean, alongside the route gates no longer booting you off your bike, while in battle we had those supermassive talking points not worth looking at, like the hypnosis nerf to make Diamond and Pearl the only mainline games where had 70 accuracy for some reason. Among these worthless changes, how about updates to the trainer AI? So they're not doing their best wild Pokemon impressions. Yeah, for some reason we're trying to catch back up to a standard that Emerald had prior. Why? But yeah, that's roughly it. There's really not much else to Platinum's mechanical end in contrast to the previous experience. It's still Gen 4 for the most part. Home with the physical special split, trainers talking in battle just to be slow, and Fog because you really needed transit flashbacks. You know, give or take some glitching related nonsense. Gen 4 is still peak, meaning we can get to the single most important part of Platinum, fixing the nightmare that the gameplay experience was, because it was undoubtedly the worst part of Diamond and Pearl, and arguably BDSP as well. To call Diamond and Pearl's experience tragic would be an understatement. From an abysmal Pokemon lineup, which would horribly hinder the bosses, there's an atrocious level curve, the traveling aspects we've already gone over, and basically just everything in regards to playing through the game. It sucked. With the ball in Platinum's court, the game is finally acceptable. Without a doubt, the most improved and important change was to the Pokemon selection. The 150 lineup of Diamond and Pearl was frankly pathetic. Not only was it just the bare minimum for the series, going on to its 8th set of games, which copied the originals while being released after games that had a much higher cap. Although being a number alone loses the nuance, because version exclusives exist as a feature, some people can't get their trade mons and the such, limiting it to being far less at times before your own self-imposed, hey, I don't want to use legendaries or something of the sort. Although the decks did at least have the one upside of at least allowing every single Pokemon in the regional decks to at least be battleable. However, to absolutely nobody's surprise, it just proceeded to get worse, mainly in the department of Pokemon type variety, where multiple typings were beyond dry in their offerings. It was frankly pathetic. God forbid we bring the Sinnoh Pokemon that were excluded from the Sinnoh decks for some reason. You know, your Magmortars, Porygon Z's and friends. Platinum, though, came in swinging to fix the game. For BDSP to come in later and make it worse again. Here we went up from that pitiful 150, rising up to a pretty chill 210. Okay, technically the number is more accurately 207 as the other box art legends and a mythical just cannot be battled during the main game. But yeah, image fetching, I guess. A number that that leaves us with this little thing called diversity. A number that actually fixes most of the typing diversity issues. Yes, gamers, this is where the fun begins. Because we gotta go run back to Diamond and Pearl. Their typing diversity was frankly pathetic, as accounting for all of our fully evolved mons and the ones that we can't, we only had 2 fire type lines, 2 ice type lines, and a group of 3 electrics, alongside 3 dragons. Important to mention, as not only is the single fire type option immediately skewing your starter choice, but primarily because the boss trainers use these typings too, and as a result, failed to reach the game's self-imposed rule of monotype teams, so much to the point where we see half of a team being random junk, or more than half of it being unrelated, while certain mons were left out for just being bad. Other typings had arguably way too many reps, or more struggling, but to no measurable degree. It was bad, very, very much bad. But now, every type, excluding dragon, kind of, has at least 5 mons for you to pull from. Meanwhile, a type like water gets a measly 1 addition. Yes, now it's gonna starve. Immediately with mon additions, it's great. Doubly so when a few prior post-game encounters are now main game accessible, alongside certain evolution items for those Pokemon actually being a part of the main game. BDSP, what the hell was that? I hate the fact I even have to point that out. All on top of the post-game extras of roamers that you'll never catch, both of the main legends being catchable, and more event encounters including Registeel pardoned of its war crimes. Although we've got a little bit of a problem, as unlocking the post-game still sadly requires you to battle, catch, or view everything in the regional decks. So instead of 150, it's 210. A lot more mons to find, and far more room for error when missing these menaces on your time. Just like with Diamond and Pearl, handfuls of mons are only on single optional trainers that are incredibly easy to miss, not only requiring you to go out of your way for a bunch of mons, but encouraging you to battle all of the optional trainers. But depending on how sadistic you are, this could potentially be at least a fun completion thing to do. But hey, once the suffering is over, you can once again unlock the proper post game with much more content in tow. Minus the whole you should probably battle every trainer thing. The mons additions are absolutely massive and the single most important change the game provides. Those new mons end up patching up our boss trainer issues as well, while simultaneously these teams just end up being better across the board. A few teams were left untouched mon-wise, others were notably improved with better mons replacing others, like Gardenia's evolved Cherubi, Fantina's team being toned down to be arguably more dangerous due to being early as the new 3rd gym, though most importantly the patching up of those teams that weren't all monotype, finally no longer having exceptions to their self-imposed rule. Technically Aaron's still not matching the rule, but Drippy evolves from a bug type, he gets a pass, right? Yes, Flint, Volkner, and Candace can finally live up to their typings, but otherwise there's not too much left there. Like movesets and general team comps just make the battles harder. Of course we have the buffs to the trainer AI as mentioned earlier, and in a more fun sense we get a new battle with Cyrus. But the level curve is where the true bettering slides in. Diamond and Pearl, we had 2 level curve related problems. One being the standstill during the 3rd or 4th gym section because of their pathetic attempt at non-linearity, and a second with the massive Elite 4 level jump. Here, Rourke is unchanged at a 14 cap. Gardenia has a level average bump by 1, still a 22 peak. Jupiter actually has her Skuntank surpass that of the previous ace at 23. Fantina spoon feeds you with mid-20s capping at 26. Rival 3 ones up at 27, and again, like Jupiter, above Gardenia this time. Maylene's average is heightened to 32, with a higher average with the Fantina EXP in mind. Wake no longer shares levels with Maylene due to being always after her progression-wise, all above 30, capping maybe a bit high at 37, before Celestic Town and the 38 capped Rival 5, which are reasonably improved. 41 for Byron, with the may or may not visit to Iron Island's interior prior. Candace all above 40, and being a 2 level diff from Diamond and Pearl. Cyrus 2 and Saturn 2 with level jumps of 3 and 4 respectively, all before Volkner's level jump of 1. Dragging us to victory road where the levels still feel a bit low, although getting delivered to the Pokemon League with the final rival dropping a cap of 2 from 53 to 51 for a lower team average. You think being lower is bad, but it's actually helpful. Aaron with a 49 for the low and 53 as a peak, essentially dragging levels out by about 4 across the board, all the way through Cynthia, no longer peaking at 66, but rather 62. Still, unfortunately, keeping their wide Elite 4 level laddering of 13 levels, making for an entry point being pretty hard still, as you're basically always going to be over-leveling and or under-leveling junk as you go, of course making difficulty hard to plan for. So, for a recap here, the mid-game went much higher, courtesy of a sooner 3rd gym. Gyms 4 and 5 getting this little thing called progression, before of course dragging the ceiling down on the Elite 4 with a more reasonable level jump. Not that the level jump existing is a good thing. Overall, making the level curve flow much nicer. Only really hindered by the game's EXP XP mechanics, but that's obvious, and you can only do so much in spite of it. So it's good enough. At the end of the adventure, the biggest flaws were addressed, making for a much more enjoyable time. You actually having good variety in team building, foes that actually take advantage of a greater mon selection, and a level curve that doesn't suddenly stop for a bad reason on top of just randomly slamming on the gas and doing a flip. This alone is a big one-up and absolutely needed, really showing up the Diamond and Pearl remakes when they decided to just ignore everything Platinum did better. Okay, it's time for our side content supply. Here, we get a load of content that drastically makes Platinum take the crown over its companions in terms of things to do outside of that main experience, because you never knew that new content would in fact be new. For the sake of not wasting your time, we're starting with all the new stuff before blitzing through the returning everything else Sinnoh previously had in order to see how content complete the experience is. Because of course, it's worth mentioning everything. So first, content we've droned on about already with Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Yeah, it's the Battlefront here. Here it's different from Emerald, as we have 5 buildings rather than 7, and a much more bland offering in general. The Battle Tower is obviously here since it was already present in Diamond and Pearl. It's still your bland 7 battles in a row gauntlet with foes gradually getting harder, just like you fighting Sleep getting harder battle by battle. Especially when we have almost the same thing, but different, being offered through the Battle Arcade. Again, 7 battles, but with a wheel affecting every single battle. One that is easily timed to pretty much always force the negatives on your foe to be even easier and more mind-numbing than the Battle Tower. The Battle Factory is again 7 in a row, but you're not using your own mons, but rather a randomly selected lineup from a pool where you could swap with your opponents upon winning. Chaining wins is challenging, the RNG is fun, undoubtedly making for the best battle facility here. It's no shocker as to why this came back from Emerald. The Battle Castle is again a 7 win streak, bit of nonsense, this time without natural healing or your items. But here you earn currency in order to get your forms of healing items or info on the foes, or buying the ability to buy even more, just delaying even further when you'll get involved with the rest. The fun takes too long to start. The idea is here, but the delay in it ever getting good, alongside the fact that PLA just does it better, somehow sadly leaves this as a bit of a dud. Leaving us with the Battle Hall, a 10 in a row 1v1 session, or 2v2, where you can pick the types of foes you battle, and it's just exhausting. It's fine, but much like the Battle Frontier itself, it's just a little bit underwhelming. But still a decent time sink at the very least, especially when the BP you earn can fund a very important variety of items and TMs. But speaking of TMs, surprise, we got move tutors. No, not like the ones in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. These of course require your useless collection of shards to be exchanged for attacks, which is actually a pretty damn nice addition. So at least our moveset environment is flourishing, and in that case right there, even during the main game. Again, there's a bit of an excuse to actually use these attacks in this game because there's just a lot of new endgame content, such as the gym leader and companion rematches, as after the post-game story is done, you can rebattle a selection of them daily with, you guessed it, enhanced teams, drastically increasing the quality of the teams across the board to make the battles just much better for your endgame experience. Unlike the Elite Four Round 2, which sadly only really does level jumps, but it's still a very welcome addition, don't get it twisted. Similarly, speaking with the idea of rematches, the Rival has the same kind of thing going on, but with 3 waves of improvements. Similarly, we have these new, just generic trainers and Pokemon centers with, guys, just guess it man, gradually better teams. Although the VS Seeker kind of makes these trainers useless. And for remaining features, there is nothing left of value. Yeah. As next, we have the Resort House. It's a money dump to make a villa go from nothing to something. It's a minor money time sink and nothing much else. Meaning, oh boy, it only gets worse. As for the Union Room nonsense, we get new shenanigans that my artist rendition will hopefully paint well, as this spinning eggs feature lets you trade eggs among a group of people to randomly disperse the lineup among a squad of people, which doesn't really matter that much when trading eggs normally exists, but it can be funny, although pointless. So from pointless to almost useless, what if you could save replays of the friendly battles and Battle Frontier runs to pretend to study later? Yeah, the VS Recorder lets you save a replay and, who cares? It's supposed to be some weird flex to share among the internet with the GTS overhaul, otherwise known as lost media, so it doesn't really matter. Just like the idea of the Wi-Fi Plaza wanting to be some weird social hangout minigame hub that is also lost media. Thank you, Nintendo. Thanks for devaluing these games, that was really cool. And unfortunately, content content-wise, that's, for the most part, the relevant new stuff, which means we get to slowly attempt to speedrun through the Diamond and Pearl content kept intact. Diving into that long lineup, we have the Diamond and Pearl revamped contests with notably more depth through a dress-up minigame, an easy dancing minigame, and a move showcasing thing with a lot more attacks existing, and its new judge system. The contest stats were tied to the Poffin system, which making them is kinda bad now, as Platinum allows you to buy very nicely reaching Poffins to help Mons specialize a lot better, but obviously not being good for a Mon trying to solo everything. The Amity Square is still around to have Pokemon following you and rarely gives you dress-up accessories. This time with a geographical makeover and new Mons to have tag along, specifically the starters, so you can at least always use the damned feature. Again, returning is the Safari Zone, still a cheap upfront payment for limited balls to be used against Mons that'll otherwise flee, with extra Mons post and at decks. Platinum's difference is that the layout here is even worse than Diamond and Pearls. The Panel Park is still your transfer tool to drag up Mons from Gen 3 and is completely untouched from the previous. Obviously for the worse, as there's a daily transfer cap. Just use it in Heart Gold Soul Silver instead. Please do yourself that favor if you can. Next, we got all the extra Pokemon encounter methods all piled up. Fishing, but the Super Rod is NetDex exclusive, which of course gives post-game exclusive encounters to new areas. The hunting trees that will give you extra encounters if you wait a while in real life, which kills the want to ever use it. The Poke Radar opening up new encounters in most areas, while being able to force the same encounters to keep appearing. Swarms again to make things spawn for a day at random, alongside the Mansion Swarms with their weird 2 temporary daily Mon rollover period. Also having a GBA game inserted into the DS's other port post and at deck also adds extra encounters to the pool at the cost of nothing. Seriously, all over the damn place there are plenty new ways to make more Mons appear, and it's pretty damn swell. Well, when the daily events are out of the picture, that is. The game corner still exists to keep the kiddos gambling, because the slot machines are of course beyond hype. Yes, it's time for you to join me in gambling addiction, but for transparency reasons, this is a joke. The underground is still around to dig up valuable items at the cost of 0, hang out as a social experience, and to house the game's weekend secret base features. Here with Platinum though, a different. Instead of the Cranidos and Shieldon fossils being determined via version exclusives, here the fossils are determined by trainer ID. Yeah, they don't want you getting both. Berry growing is surprise once again here. Outside of the whole IRL timer thing still existing because duh, it's Gen 4 berries. So mulch exists to modify your yields, adding a degree of depth to the system. The depth is a 1-inch pool. The Pokeball seals exist still to decorate your balls with a degree of personalization, before unequipping them becomes mandatory to box them on. Just being a bit annoying. The difference is here that foes, some of them for some reason just have ball capsules on their Mons for visual flair, being a constant reminder that the feature exists because you keep forgetting about it. Finally ending our recap with the Poketch, being the fun little tool on the bottom screen, packed with a metric load of useful features too vast to count. But the big difference here this time is a back button so you could cycle through the feature faster. Why wasn't this here before, or better yet in BDSP for that matter? We will never know. Congrats, we're through the features, and if it wasn't obvious, it's absolutely up there as a feature-packed Pokemon experience. Surely packed in ways that the previous 8 games could only dream of, but I guess it's time to look at the biggest dud of the game. The praise can only go so far. I would say act surprised, but at this point you're already prepped to know the Platinum story, much like the original games, is complete slop. It's the Pokemon standard, however. Third game syndrome does exist, so the plot is slightly different and hardly better. Starting us off, you and your rival bank on meeting a professor in order to become trainers, which, no way, it works! Then you're off to a lake for minor plot implications before getting the Pokedex to go off and do the gym challenge. Along the way, Team Galactic simply exists and is being evil, stealing power plant energy with a new character that does nothing really, taking Mons from people, and coming across Pokedexes that aren't theirs, and the such. You're doing nothing of value, your rival's being cringe about his talk about his master or something, before the feds show up to help with the guy, before just leaving. 6 batches in, and Team Galactic starts snapping legendary Pokemon and bombing lakes. Yes, being incredibly based by committing acts of terrorism. Well, you're on the back foot, flying around and feeling dead inside because snow routes. So no way, the big thing is gonna happen, so you free those captured legendaries, and Cyrus's plan of making a new world begins, because he has Yaga and Palkia this time. But a giant angry worm isn't too thrilled and stops him, where you hop into the floating bumhole and eventually stop him. And you're off again for 0 plot, eventually becoming champion. This time we have another minor post game, but the catch is now more Team Galactic stuff and your rival spouting the word daddy. I was gonna make a funny voice clip with that, but I know that'd be a horrible idea used out of context. Essentially, the remnants of Team Galactic are trying something in Stark Mountain, and the gameplay leads to another. Now the feds haul them off, finally putting an end to Team Galactic where the previous game did did not. The post-game story is actually better now because it actually serves a purpose. Yeah, crazy how plot relevance will make the post-game better. And overall, the plot is basically the same with sprinkles thrown on the cake, making the world feel a bit more alive, ultimately at the same outcome. It's better than Diamond and Pearls, but only by a little. With that, alongside the mass bettering of the gameplay, the verdict on this game should be blatantly obvious in regards to the oncoming glazing. And at the end, we have the definitive Sinnoh experience, come far too soon. At its best, it's a journey through an expansive region with quality enough battles, bonus gameplay additions, expansive feature lists, and being decent in the actual experience in the playthrough sense, and obviously a big leg up on the games it's a third improved version of. It's a solid standalone experience, and in the context of the Sinnoh experience is better. Yes, sadly better than the Diamond and Pearl remakes. In Fumbles, this game really just suffers from early gen Pokemon issues, noticeably struggles through something like the EXP system accidentally trying its best to make you use less mons, the necessity of HMs to progress the story, much less reaching areas to explore, and just okay features like most of the Battle Frontier, or pointless stuff like the Villa customization, or of course time gating on other features that you care about. With all that in mind, how is the complete package? And it's a bit complicated. And it's still pretty damn good, going unchanged from 4 stars. Which is funny because when editing this video, I kept hitting a roadblock. I had convinced myself that I was wrong prior by a noticeable amount, and I did want to knock the game down a peg or two, because the magnitude of the changes for some reason just did not seem as possible or realistic for such a gap compared to Diamond and Pearl. Yeah, it's weird, and despite the second guessing and even altering my verdict after scripting, things are in fact doomed, but I think I see the vision. And this is where I want to hear from the comments just so I don't think I'm crazy. Anyways, moving on. In terms of a recommendation, it's still a yes, because turning around on something so small and actively opinionated like that is just whack. Leaving me to close this out with my takes on the game, and it goes a little bit like this. While I like the game, there isn't a world where I'd rather play this infinitely better, far more refined version of Diamond and Pearl over the absolute disastrous jokes those games were. You know, adoring those games for their imperfections as much as I actively can dislike it. Platinum, in contrast, is just the fine, arguably sanitized via the lack of bullet hole level issues. Whereas BDSP, in said contrast, is just abhorrently bland. At the end, Platinum is fine IMO, but I'm never looking to go back and do it, when Diamond and Pearl kind of exists and is just funny. Even with solutions to the leveling issues, day of the week events being easily solvable in emulator, much like the Heart Gold Soul Silver stuff was. Alright fellas and fellettes, like and subscribe or whatever, because that's all for today. So yeah, thank you for watching, and until next time, I leave you with a fun fact for the road. This book says Among Us 3 separate times, and it's really awesome.